How often, the average day, the average week, do you think about the rule of law? How the rule of law impacts your daily life? You decide you're going to go to the store. You need a new pair of sneakers. You jump in your car. Do you come to a complete stop at the stop sign in your neighborhood, or do you maybe roll through it? Now you're driving on the street heading to the store. Do you obey all posted speed limits? Or do you think to yourself, I wonder how fast I can go without getting pulled over? Okay, fair enough. Most of us probably engage in those daily transgressions. Once you get to the store, you've got to park your car. Do you feed the parking meter or use the parking app to pay for parking? Or do you just take your chances at maybe getting a parking ticket? Now you're in the store. You're trying on those sneakers. Do you think to yourself, maybe I should just run out of the store without paying for the sneakers? Just steal them? Probably not, right? Well, that's the rule of law at work, in your lives, every day. Now, sure, it's also your sense of morality, which is probably a product of your upbringing. But if we didn't have laws against speeding or stealing from stores, how different would our daily experiences be? The rule of law is foundational to a free, fair, safe society. And when I think about the rule of law, how it impacts our lives, how it impacts our thought processes, both consciously and subconsciously, I always come back to my favorite Abraham Lincoln saying, be sure to put your feet in the right place, then stand firm. We're going to take a big leap, okay, from speeding and shoplifting to the survival of American democracy, right? That's a big jump. My name is Glenn Kirshner, and I'm a rule of law guy. I started as a federal prosecutor, as an Army JAG back in the 80s, prosecuting all manner of crimes from death penalty to espionage cases. After 6.5 years on active duty, I left the Army and I joined the Department of Justice, specifically the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia. I eventually became chief of the homicide section at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, responsible for overseeing all grand jury investigations involving murders and all homicide prosecutions in the courts of Washington, D.C. After a little over 30 years as a Fed, I retired from DOJ, and I began working as an on-air legal analyst for NBC News and MSNBC, discussing and analyzing the legal issues of the day. I've also continued my rule of law work, posting daily legal analysis videos on my YouTube channel, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirshner. I'm not here to promote my YouTube channel, but don't forget to hit subscribe. And every day in my 30 years as a prosecutor, and now in my professional chapter 2 as a legal analyst, I try to remain keenly aware of where I plant my feet. And every day, whether you think about it or not, you're deciding where to plant your feet. I had the honor and the privilege along the way of teaching at George Washington University for a total of 9 years, 4 years in the law school and 5 years teaching undergraduate criminal justice. And on the first day of every semester, I did the same thing. I would draw a brick wall, what for me passed for a brick wall. Let me prove I'm not a very good artist. There's my brick wall. I would draw it on the whiteboard for my students, and I would tell them that brick wall represents the rule of law, specifically the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And I would put on one side of the wall the government, politicians, police, prosecutors, and on the other side of the wall, I put us, we the people. And in a very real sense, that brick wall protects us from our own government. You know, the Bill of Rights it's like a list of don'ts telling the government what they can't do to we the people. First Amendment, don't mess with our free speech rights. Fifth Amendment, don't try to make us incriminate ourselves. Sixth Amendment, don't mess with our right to counsel, our right to an attorney. Eighth Amendment, don't even think about trying to inflict cruel and unusual punishment on us. That brick wall protects us all, and I do mean all. American citizens, documented immigrants, undocumented immigrants, visitors to our nation. If your feet are on American soil, the Constitution protects you. Now, don't get me wrong. The government, the police, the prosecutors can get to the other side of that wall, but they've got to do it right. So, you want to search my home? You better have a judicially issued search warrant. You want to seize me? You want to arrest me? You better have an arrest warrant. So in today's America, question, is that brick wall standing straight and strong? Or is it beginning to weaken? Is it beginning to waver? Is it beginning to crumble even? And if that wall weakens, where are we, the people, going to plant our feet? Let's look at some recent feet planting examples, and these may be familiar to you because they've been in the news recently. In 2019, there was a young El Salvadoran immigrant named Kilmar Abrego Garcia who planted his feet in immigration court. And he won a court order from an immigration judge saying that the government may not deport him back to El Salvador because he persuaded the judge he had a reasonable fear of persecution if he were returned to El Salvador. Then, sadly, horrifically, in March of 2025, the government, our government, not only violated that court order, but they violated Abrego Garcia's constitutional due process rights. Due process, in the context of this case, is just a fancy term for notice and opportunity to be heard. Notice of what the government's going to try to do to you, like deport you to a foreign land, and an opportunity to be heard in court by a judge to make your case, generally with the assistance of an attorney, as to why the government shouldn't be permitted to do that to you. But the government, our government, violated both the court order and Abrego Garcia's Fifth Amendment due process rights. They grabbed him, they put him on a plane, they sent him to El Salvador, and what's worse is they pay the government of El Salvador to imprison him in a notoriously dangerous prison, even though Abrego Garcia had been convicted of no crime. And as he sat in that jail cell, he had to decide where to plant his feet. And he decided to use the rule of law and file a lawsuit in federal court in Maryland with the assistance of some determined attorneys, and try to convince that judge that the federal government should be forced to bring him back to the United States. And he won. He won, and the judge ordered the federal government to facilitate his release from that prison in El Salvador and return him to the United States so his due process rights could be honored. Government didn't like that outcome, so they appealed. And Abrego Garcia, figuratively speaking, planted his feet in the Court of Appeals, and he won again. And the government appealed again. And Abrego Garcia, figuratively speaking, planted his feet in the United States Supreme Court. And he won. The rule of law won. And then, when he was back in the United States, he literally planted his feet back in that federal court in Maryland, and he won a court order directing the federal government may not deport him. That is some rule of law-driven feet planting. Another example. Former DOJ paralegal Sean Dunn threw a sandwich at a police officer. You probably all saw that, right? It was captured on video and played on an endless loop by mainstream media. An important aside, the reason we all got to see that is because we have people all around the country, just like you and me, who are not just figuratively, but literally planting their feet in the street, raising their cell phones and recording, documenting, bearing witness to what the federal government, immigration agents are doing to we the people. And so we saw Sean Dunn get angry. He was angry, we learned from the reporting, because the government had militarized the streets of his city, Washington, D.C. He was out there sort of protesting, lost his cool, threw a sandwich. The sandwich bounced off the bulletproof vest of the officer, causing no injury. And Sean Dunn was arrested. And take it from this old prosecutor who worked protester cases in D.C., we have a lot of protests in D.C. And they can get loud, they can get enthusiastic, they can get a little volatile. People are marching, people are protesting, they're yelling, they're chanting. Sometimes there's pushing and there's shoving. People are exercising their First Amendment rights vigorously. But not a lot of those protesters get arrested. Some do. And when protesters get arrested, it usually results in a low-level criminal charge, what we call a misdemeanor. It's the kind of charge that if you're convicted, a judge might order probation or might order you perform some community service, something like that. And once Sean Dunn was arrested, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia had a decision to make, what to do with Sean Dunn's case. And, in my opinion, the U.S. Attorney tried to push her way through that brick wall. And she sent a prosecutor into the grand jury and had that prosecutor try to convince the grand jury to criminally indict Sean Dunn for a federal felony offense that carries 8 years in prison for tossing a sandwich. Sound like prosecutorial overreach? Well, the grand jurors, just regular folks like us, called from all around the city or the jurisdiction in which the offense is alleged to have been committed, they sit there, they listen to the evidence, and they serve as the conscience of the community. And they serve as a check against governmental abuse and overreach and misconduct. And the grand jurors had to decide where to plant their feet. And they planted their feet by announcing to the prosecutor, no, we will not indict Sean Dunn for an 8-year federal felony. He could get 8 years in federal prison for tossing a sandwich. Did you ever hear the saying, don't make a federal case out of it? It's kind of the poster child for that case, for that saying. And they rejected the U.S. Attorney's attempt to indict Sean Dunn for that 8-year federal felony. But the U.S. Attorney just kind of fumbled forward and said, well, then I'm going to charge Sean Dunn myself with a misdemeanor. And, those are the cases that are more typical in protests. And you should know you don't need a grand jury indictment to charge somebody with a misdemeanor, only with a felony. So, the prosecutor signed a criminal complaint. That's all it takes. And now Sean Dunn has to make another decision where to plant his feet. Does he demand his right to a jury trial, or does he cry uncle and plead guilty? Well, he demanded a jury trial. And now we have another group of citizens sitting as the conscience of the community. This time it's 12 in a wooden box in a courtroom in Washington, D.C., who listened to the evidence from the prosecution, listened to the evidence from Sean Dunn's attorney, and they planted their feet by announcing that the verdict was not guilty. That is some important feet planting. And indeed, we've had a lot of important feet planting recently. That young El Salvadoran immigrant, Abrego Garcia, that former DOJ paralegal, Sean Dunn, the grand jurors, the trial jurors, the folks who are planting their feet in the street all across the country and using their cell phones to document what the government is doing to the people. And we, you and I, make rule of law driven, feet planting decisions every day. But the decisions that we make usually involve things like speeding, stopping at stop signs, paying for parking. But in today's America, we have far more consequential, rule of law driven, feet planting decisions to make. So when the time comes and the issues involve things like the health of American democracy, maybe even the viability, the survival of American democracy, when the time comes, the question is, where will you plant your feet? And regarding when that time might come, the way I see it, the time is always now. Thank you.